Hi, everyone. Thank you for attending the webinar. I'm Adriana Whiteley. I'm Director of FD Strategies, and I'm a member of the IET Media Network. We'll be talking about the C2PA today. I have two amazing guests that I'll let them introduce themselves as they come in. But in case they're very modest, they're very good, very knowledgeable people with lots of energy that talk about the C2PA, and I can explain what is the standard and what is it used for and how they're employing it. So just a quick introduction. So we have, the IET Media Network has a few webinars that we have this year. The next two ones are going to be about security, and we'll be talking about hacks and security of devices later on. We'll be able to sign up to them up later on. But just an introduction of where the C2PA joins this ecosystem against misinformation. We can have several ways of dealing with misinformation. One of them is starting to prevention, education, certification, detection, and counteracting misinformation. And the C2PA acts mostly on the certification side and a bit on the prevention side as well. So I will let Len start explaining what is this standard work in practice and how it's moving and what is the expectations on how it's going to be implemented in the future.
Great, thanks, Adriana. Happy to do that. So, hi everybody. I am Leonard Rosenthal. I work for Adobe Systems as the senior principal architect for content authenticity, among other things. But today I am wearing my hat as chair of the C2PA's technical working group. So all of the stuff we're going to talk about today. So when I say we, many times throughout this presentation, I am referring to the C2PA. So I am wearing my C2PA hat for this presentation, as it were. And then in the middle of the presentation, I will turn things over to my colleague Laura, and I'll let her introduce herself and take you through the work of the BBC and how a lot of this gets put into practice. So what is this thing? And what is the group? So the C2PA itself is an organization. We are the Coalition for Content Provenance and Authenticity. We have 11 steering committee members, so you can see the logos of a number of folks who are responsible for driving the organization. So we set the policies and the direction of the organization. And you can see that we're not just, as we're big tech. You can see, of course, companies like the BBC, Publicis Group, and such represented there as well. In addition to the steering committee members, the actual people on the ground doing the work, we have over 500 members, member organizations who participate and work on the standard itself. And I'll get into the details of that and some of the ways that we do our business. So what have we been doing? So we founded this organization back in the beginning of 2021 as a result of two other organizations, the Content Authenticity Initiative and something called Project Origin, both of whom were solving the same problem. And so we came together as a group and founded one organization, so rather than having two different solutions. And within a year, we produced the first version 1.0 of our specification. And that has evolved since, and we've continued to move it forward. We're now at version 2.1, and I'll talk about that in a bit and where it's going. But the big thing that I think is worth taking away over the last couple of years is that in 2023, we really saw the implementation skyrocket, especially from the creation side. So beginning that year, you saw camera manufacturers like Leica deliver hardware, Sony and Nikon commit to delivering cameras that have since been delivered. You have AI vendors, whether it's Google, Microsoft, OpenAI, etc., integrating it into their tools so that every one of those images, for example, that have been produced by DALL-E or Adobe Firefly for years now, so it's billions and billions of images, all contain this C2PA information, what we call a content credential that I'm going to talk about today. And then in 2024, I like to think of was the year of the consumer. And this is where we saw adoption on the consumption side. So TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, LinkedIn. So more and more places where you are consuming content started to now show the credentials when they were there. And so this is a great progression. And 2025, as we kick it off, still pretty early in the year, is going to continue to drive now both of those things. And we're seeing more and more as that goes along. So what do we do? What are we focusing on? So our name says it all. We focus on provenance. We focus on this idea of stating the facts, stating what you want to state about the asset in question, and incorporating that into this provenance record we call a content credential. We want to, of course, educate people about this. Now, this is not just educating developers and implementers. That's obviously important. But it's also educating policymakers. How do we get the folks at the highest level of governments, whether it's federal governments or state governments, to bring this out as requirements in legislation? And that's our policy, but also to end users. How do we get users to understand about this nutrition label, if you will, that now can be present on their assets and why they want to use it and why they want to consume it? The one thing we do not do, as was mentioned by Adriana, we don't do detection. And we don't do detection predominantly because detection assumes that once something is created, you don't modify it. And we believe very strongly, and of course, coming from Adobe, no surprise, that edits are good. And so if you assume that people will be editing content, and that's the reality of the situation, that's what people do. I think you can, we all know that probably every single image on Instagram has had a filter applied. In fact, I think I saw a statistic that it's somewhere in excess of 98% of images on Instagram have at least one filter applied. That's an edit, which means that detection techniques aren't going to be useful in those scenarios. And we don't have to worry about the AIs getting better. So in the case of AI, we're not fighting with them. Oh, we can detect. No, we want to state it. And that also really helps people understand that we're not just about AI. As you saw from the timeline, we started this process really before generative AI became a thing. And so we are about provenance. So even the idea that a human takes a picture with a camera and edits it in their favorite photo editor and posts it online, it was all humans. That is extremely useful provenance. In fact, some people think that's even more important provenance. So we are about provenance. We are not about, is this AI or not AI? That's just one small piece of possible provenance, as you'll see. Okay, so what is this thing? I keep mentioning we have this standard, we have this content credentials thing. What is it? It is an open standard, meaning anyone can implement it, go out and use it, reference it for storing and accessing cryptographically verifiable and tamper-evident information whose trustworthiness can be assessed based on a defined trust model. Okay, so in its simplest form, you could think of this as metadata that is, again, tamper evident. You can stick it inside your asset and we can detect, anyone using the standard can detect whether or not it has been modified downstream. It's not secure. We're not preventing you from modifying it. Nothing prevents it. It's just a bunch of bits. But using standard approaches that have been in use for over 30 years, we can detect that it has been modified and warn you accordingly. So let's talk a little bit more about that. I do want to mention, as I said, we're currently at version 2.1 of our standard. And this is from the C2PA directly. You can get it online. Please feel free to get access to it. In addition to our core technical specification, we also have a series of what we call informative documents. So we have an explainer, we have guidance, we have user interface, pieces. So all sorts of additional documents are available at that link. And then our document is on its way to ISO standardization. It is currently at what is called DIS, or Draft International Standard stage, and we look forward to it being adopted as ISO 22144 within the next couple of months, currently targeted for April timeframe. All right, so let's dive a little deeper. I see questions are coming up. That's great. I wanted to get through this. We will get to your time for questions, I promise. So do not worry. All right, so what do we got in here? So you can think of, as I mentioned, it's a container of provenance data. So each one of those pieces of provenance we call an assertion. And so inside of this blob of data, this container of data, is what we call the assertion store. And that represents each one of these statements, these assertions. And so here in this example, you can see that there are 4 assertions. Now, there are 20, 30, 40 different predefined assertion types in our specification. We're always adding new ones based on usage. And of course, we fully support custom assertions. So if a given workflow requires you to state something that we haven't given you a language yet for, that can always be stated as well. So anything, any type of information can be asserted, perfectly fine. So in this example, we have a hash, what we call a hard binding. We have a statement about the actions that this particular user did. So you can see that the actions box on the left pointing over to, in a user interface, might look something like this. This is just an example interface. It's not mandatory in any way, but it gives you an idea of how this data on the left can be presented to an end user about what actually happened. So we have a concept we call ingredients. And ingredients represent pieces that make up your assets. So you can think about this in an image editor. Every time you place another image, or in a video editor, much more commonly, you have a series of clips, and every one of those clips is an ingredient. Your audio track is an ingredient. Your captioning is an ingredient. So all of those ingredients are captured, and the reason for that is because each one of them may itself have provenance content credentials associated with it. And so you end up with this potential tree of provenance, which is the reality of how things are created. And all of that is therefore expressible. And of course, there can be additional metadata and other things that you'd like to express. Then all of these assertions are bundled together with something we call a claim. So the claim tells you, for example, about what tool was used. So in this particular example, the ever popular Edit Suite, I'm sure all of you have a copy of Edit Suite on your machine, was used to perform this action, create this content credential. And then all of this is digitally signed using standard technology. We'll talk about that a little later. And so now you have this cryptographically signed tamper evident bundle that can be associated with, is associated with the asset in question. And that's your content credential. So as I mentioned, the most common way for these credentials to get used is they are embedded into the assets in question. So these can be embedded into various image formats, video, audio, document, even fonts. This is actually a great example of where it's not something that we as the C2PA ever envisioned doing, but the font industry came to us and said, we would like to establish provenance for fonts. And we're like, great, we're happy to have that. And so now you can have this scenario where the font vendor establishes provenance. You use that font in, let's say, Microsoft Word in your editor, and then that information then carries through when you go export as PDF. And in that final PDF, you now have all of that again, that graph of provenance with all of the ingredients going all the way down, even not only to the images you might have placed or the text that you wrote, but even to the fonts that you chose to use. So you have this great provenance record that can be established. But if you don't want to embed it, or you'd like to have copies elsewhere, that's great. We fully support content credentials in the cloud, on blockchains or distributed ledgers. sidecar files. All of these things are possible. We do not mandate any specific usage of that credential. What we are about is that credential. We give you a lot of great guidance and a lot of great information about how to do these things, but it is up to the implementers, both at the software or hardware level, as well as potentially you as an end user, to choose the methods that work for you. And I'll give you an example. In Adobe Photoshop, when you apply a content credential in Photoshop, Adobe gives you the choice. You can say embed it or put it in the cloud or both. So this way the user, you as an end user, get to choose where your credentials live for your individual assets. And then this technology, these provenance records, in addition to being stored in these various places, can also be referenced through watermarks or fingerprints. And so the combination of these three things, the provenance record, a watermark, and a fingerprint, and it is a concept we call durable content credentials, because that means that, let's say you were to embed the record and somehow it got stripped out, either intentionally by a bad actor or unintentionally by poorly written software, that watermark or fingerprint can still retrieve it later on. And so we call that durable content credentials. And you're starting to see that implemented in more and more places today to enhance the previous, let's just embed it scenarios. So as I mentioned back when I talked about edits being good, what that means is that we want that provenance record to also be updated throughout the life cycle of the asset. So you create it, we establish a content credential. It's edited, we add or we update with a new set of credential information. It's published, we can put publishing information in there as a next update of that provenance, etc., all the way till the end user views that final content that was published or shared with them, and they see that provenance record in their content credential, hopefully with that little what we call the CR pin. But it doesn't have to be. On other systems, for example, on Instagram, you might see a little made with AI thing that is also exposing to you the presence of content credentials. So again, we don't mandate a specific UI, but hopefully you'll see more and more of this CR pin. LinkedIn, for example, shows this, as do other sites. So let me dive a little deeper into some of the technology. I've mentioned this before. We use cryptography. We use standard approaches. We did not reinvent any wheels, and that's actually something that's very key to our entire technology stack. We haven't really invented any new wheels. What we did was we took a bunch of parts and we put them together in a new and unique way to accomplish content credentials. So one of the pieces, one of those parts that we pulled together, I talked about hard bindings, standard hashes. You may have heard of things called SHA-256 or SHA-3. Those are cryptographic hashes. Those are all supported. For digital signatures, we use a technology called X.509. If you've ever signed a PDF file, for example, same technology. All of you, of course, browse the web. That little lock icon you see in your browser window, that's also backed by X509 certificates. Technology's been around over 30 years, so well understood, well established. We leverage the same thing. We also align with various international standards. For example, the European Standards Institute digital signature standards. We align with those ETSI standards, and that enables us to also provide long-term and archival compatible signatures. And then hardware attestation for mobile devices, post signings, timestamp and revocation editions. And then I mentioned watermarking and fingerprinting. There again, we also leverage well-established standards, so you can use your own choice again of watermark or fingerprint. We don't mandate any particular one. So we really have this nice open ecosystem, and you'll see some more examples of that in a bit. At the end of the day, all of these things we talked about, each one of these assertions, the signature, it all comes down to establishing for the end user what we call trust signals. because the C2PA cannot tell you whether or not to trust something. We can tell you that it was signed by a trusted entity. We can tell you, that the time that signing took place. We can list out all of those assertions for you. But at the end of the day, every human being has to make a concrete decision about whether or not they themselves trust this asset. And the example I love to give is that I live in the United States. Here in the US, we have a news source I'm sure many of you are familiar with called CNN. If you were to ask 50% of the US if you trusted something from CNN, they would say no. And you ask the other half and they say yes. So no matter how great our content credentials are and how much information and trustworthy they themselves are, at the end of the day, if somebody doesn't trust the source, it just doesn't matter. And so this is why trust is determined by a human. And we're going to give that human as much information as possible in that provenance record, in that credential, for them to make that decision. I did mention early on that while we started before generative AI, we haven't ignored it. That would be kind of silly in today's world. And so we have 3 different areas where we have aligned a law around generative AI. So one is, of course, the simple case. As I mentioned, like you go up to DALL-E and you type in a prompt and poof, out comes an image. That image identifies itself as being wholly created by AI. Perfect, exactly what you want. This example here on the right, a user went into Adobe Photoshop. They selected a region of the image. They used what's called the generative fill feature in Photoshop, although of course many other apps have a similar feature, and said, obviously, add the flowery hair. And poof. Now this asset is not wholly created, it's partially modified by AI. And that credential not only identifies that, and although it's not shown here in this UI, behind the scenes, we've actually identified the exact region of the image where the AI was applied. And this is not only what we call spatial regions, but it can also apply to temporal regions. So this time code set, this range of time in a video or an audio was modified. It can also represent things like that, pages of a document. And then you can tell we like cooking. In the C2PA, we have recipes. So how did you do it? So the prompt that was used, or input images or sources that went into the AI making its decision, that can all be incorporated. And so that's great on the creation side, but we also think about the consumption side as well. And the most important thing that we hear from content creators is the ability for them to determine whether or not their content can be used for future training. And so there's a mechanism whereby a user can assert, do not train on this asset. And this well aligns with things like the EU AI Act and TDM exceptions in the EU and South Korea and various other countries that are establishing similar laws on their books. So this is the work that, the core work, what we call our core specification. But the C2PA also does a lot of other work. We have a group focusing on live video. We didn't talk about the live scenarios. We have a group focused on text. How does this relate to your AI chatbots, for example, or you're working with code, for example. We have a team that focuses on the threats and harms that our technology could cause people, and we want to make sure that we are open about that and how it could be misused. And then user experience, and you've seen some of the examples of the UXs that we've recommended. So a lot of other work going on in the C2PA, and this goes on every single week, every single day. That some group is meeting every day. Every week we have more and more work. So this is a lot of ongoing stuff. We are not done by any stretch, and we will continue to evolve what we do. We also don't do it in a bubble. We work with a lot of other organizations. We work with ISO, IEC, ITU. We work with the PDF Association to establish this work in the space of PDFs. We work with a group called ONVIF. ONVIF is interesting. They are the standard for all security cameras in the world. So they are establishing secure video with that cryptographically bound provenance through C2PA. SCIT is supply chain, and lots of other organizations and groups throughout the world who we are working collaboratively with to make sure that this provenance record of content credentials can be used in numerous different use cases. And you'll see one momentarily from my colleague. And just so you know, there are lots of implementations out there. So I've mentioned a few in hardware, I've mentioned a few in commercial software, but there's also open source. So if you want to go and apply and do this yourself, there are toolkits available online in a variety of programming languages for creation, for consumption. Go and do and build is certainly my call to action to all of you. And educate would be the other clear call. And I've spent lots of time mentioning all sorts of examples. So it's all over the place. It is out there. And again, we see more and more implementations around the board. And not just, again, from the, quote, big tech. One of the things that's actually been very interesting is not only from publishers, like you'll see from Laura and the BBC momentarily, but also from governments. We've seen implementations coming out of a number of government agencies around the world who are applying this to their content as well. So very exciting times. So I'm going to turn things over to Laura. I'm going to change slides for her. So just ignore me in the background, but the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Leonard. Hello, everybody, and lovely to see you all. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. That was a fantastic run through, and I'm it's a lovely time to take stock and just see how far this has gone. I can see lots of great questions coming into the chat. So I'm going to just spend a few minutes taking you through the BBC implementation of this, and then I think we'll turn over to questions fairly quickly. So Leonard, if we can go to the first slide, you will see a ghastly GPT-generated image of a woman, sort of a very schlocky horror thing that we created using ChatGPT a little while ago, which was kind of how it felt. So taking you back to Leonard's first comments around how all this began, as the BBC was still kind of waiting to find that Adobe was in this space and doing incredible work, we were looking at deepfake detection. We were looking at the kind of success rate of that and seeing how very low it was. We were looking at newsroom collaboration, which is obviously an interesting thing to do and a useful thing to do in the disinformation space. And we were looking at media literacy, which is something that a lot of people are involved with. But we felt at that point, and still do, that media provenance is a really promising, not a silver bullet, but a really promising way of helping to address this absolute sea and this tide of information, of disinformation rather, that we find ourselves tackling. And it's almost hard to imagine that back in the days when we started this 5 years ago, that felt like a kind of a pending threat, and it didn't feel quite as present and terrifying as I think it does now. So next slide, please. This was a moment that we're going to see here on the right. This is a wholly generated image. And I just wanted to talk to this because for those of us in the news industry, to whom the legitimacy and the accuracy of what we do is absolutely prime, and without trust, we have absolutely nothing. Seeing this whole image unfold around one of the major storms that we saw in the US was really interesting, and I'll tell you why. So it's a generated image. It was put out by many people, including a US politician. When it was pointed out that this was an AI image, there was absolutely no kind of shame, no taking it down, no, oh, I've been fooled. It was like, well, that doesn't matter, because this is the image that I think sums up the story, and it's kind of the vibe. It's what we feel. And this just puts us into a kind of a bit of a new paradigm, and I think it makes trustworthy journalism that the Israel that does show you real pictures even more important. We know that there's an AI channel coming along where if they can't get to a news story, they've said they will create an AI version of it. For me, that's not news, and I think the wonderful and really precious thing about a journalist or a set of journalists observing things and telling you about them and using pictures and video to illustrate them is something that we should, and audio obviously, we should never lose. And we know that an estimated 15 billion images now online AI generated. Some estimates, and these are disputed, suggest that 90% of online content will be synthetic, at least in part, by 2026, and that's so soon. And We know that the information ecosystem in which we work is constantly being disintermediated and polluted, you know, with these images which may be attractive, you know, may sum up a vibe, but, you know, are not real. And, you know, sometimes we talk about this and say that we've had 200 years of being able to kind of coalesce around, so it's the very first photograph, you know, visual imagery, and that's kind of gone now, because it's so easy for people to create and disseminate images or video or audio that is just, you know, not real. And so we need to help audiences who do want to seek out trustworthy news to maintain clear pathways to that. And that's what C2PA is all about. So if we go to the next slide. This is an old slide now, and I must update it. And it's from our friends at the Reuters Institute for the Study of Journalism. But you know, the trend has continued downwards. So the overall trust in news score has gone down since we look here at 2015, and 2022 it had dipped quite a bit. There were some countries who are outliers, Finland, for example, who seem to maintain a bit of a higher score. But generally, the trust in news is diminishing. And what we want to do with C2PA, one of the things that we really do want to do is to use C2PA and the signaling that we put in content to really underpin the validity of the content that we produce, to help audiences to understand it better, given all the things that Len has described about the metadata that we can include, and to really help to try to get people to understand and to trust in journalism and news, because we think it's a really vital part of society. Next slide, please. And so, you know, in organisations like the BBC, one of the things we really worry about is our brand being at risk. So this image you see here on the left, on the right, sorry, is a video which came out on Twitter, as it was then, and it purported to be from the BBC. That's our branding, you know, that's our sort of, you know, our graphic typeface, and it was a heavily pro-Russian view of the Russia-Ukraine war. And when we see this, it is quite horrifying, because there's very little we can do other than say this isn't ours. Whereas if we enter into a kind of a new era of the internet, where we have a digital identity of content as something which is a given, or which is, you know, an emerging factor, then we can actually point people and say, look, we're going to put these markings in our content, and you will be able to reliably trace content back to its source. So just to kind of like sum up those three things, Leonard mentioned the generative AI aspect of, you know, flagging content that's been synthetically generated, or that, you know, people have created using those means. There's provenance, going back to a source, and there's also transparency, giving people the chance to see content, see within our content how it's been made. And that's really important when it comes to protecting news brands, which are, you know, which we really value. We really value our brand. We know what we stand for, and we don't want people using imposter content to dilute or damage that. So if we can go to the next slide, please. This is the first thing we did with C2PA, and it was a video taken from Haiti. The interesting use case we thought was using it on our own website. So we'd be very unlucky if our own website was hacked. So we were really front loading the transparency issue. So if we go to the next slide, that was just a video that was shot, but then underneath it, we were able to point to, using content credentials, lots of information about this particular video. So some of it, you know, very sort of machine driven and specific, like the location, like the you know, the date and the time that it came out, and some of it actually narrative, forensic journalism, if you like, around why we believe that this image or this video that had come from one of our contributors was worthy of trust. And I want to make 2 points about this, because I think there was some really interesting outcomes from this. It was about a year ago that we first started marking content. And I'm going to put my hands up and say we really haven't done very much of it yet, as much as I would have liked, because it's a really tough thing to scale up for lots of reasons that perhaps we can talk about. But we also had, and I'm going to do full disclosure here, because we had an issue with this, which was that somebody came to us and said, actually, you know, that video you've put up, there's a bit of gunfire on there, which wasn't on the original, and it has been added. And we then had to go back and have another look at it. And I think the ability to be transparent with audiences and then to be responsive and make, you know, clear corrections is a valuable part of the news ecosystem. And it's a really valuable part of being able to have a dialogue with audiences through C2PA around the provenance and the nature of the news content that they're seeing. And we think that's a really important and really valuable part of what we do. So we've since put out, I think, 4 other pieces of video. And the other thing I wanted to just pick up on is, I know there's been a comment in the questions and answers section rather, about the safety or desirability of revealing somebody's source if they're actually covering a story. And that's another very important part of this. And Leonard touched on this, but the amount of metadata or the type of metadata that you decide to include is optional. At least most of it is. So, for example, we would absolutely remove the name and the location and various other information around a reporter who is reporting from somewhere where they were not safe if that information was made public. So it's very important, and we've worked with groups like Witness, the human rights organization, who've been amazing at kind of just helping us to shape that particular aspect of it when it comes to journalism, which is the vertical that we're interested in through Project Origin, as Linda mentioned, which is now under the auspices of the IPTC. Next slide, please. I promised we'd be quick, and so we've now got about 25 minutes, I think, for questions, and I'm glad we have, because there's quite a lot of them coming in to the Q&A. So Leonard, do you want to have a look and sort of maybe pick up some of the ones that are the technical ones in the beginning particularly, and then just throw any to me that you feel you want to? Would that be okay?
Yeah, of course, happy to. Just pulled them up myself, so let's see. It's great. So Oscar wants to know about implementation at the operating system level. So that's an interesting question. I will say that we've not had discussions with operating system vendors per se. Microsoft and Google, who certainly provide two well-known operating systems, are members. You saw their logos earlier. They've both implemented in other places. One thing that we do know, and one place that I didn't mention, that we think is actually more important right now, is browsers. So there is an active effort with the C2PA and the W3C, which is the standards body that controls the web and the web standards. And so we're actively working to get that connection, so that we want this to show up in your browser. So again, going back to that lock icon, you're on a secure site. What if these, that CR pin or whatever it becomes is on there automatically and done by your browser? And so that's something that a lot of us, not only at the C2PA, but at the W3C, would like to see happen, and that work is ongoing. So I think that's a huge part of what we want to do there. Yeah, let's see. Alex wants some examples of additional assertions. I'm just going down these in order. So talk about actions, ingredients, metadata. We have a depth, if you're familiar with something called a depth map, which is used in photography. I'm just trying to think of some other good ones that we've got. We talked about hard bindings. We talked about soft bindings. So, and then some that are specific to particular areas. So we've been working with the audio community. If you're familiar with DDEX, is a standard used in the audio world. So how do you incorporate DDEX information into your asset? We talked about PDF. So there's some PDF specific assertions in that regard. Let's see if I can find a good one for Laura. You talked a little bit about this, the privacy considerations. So I think that one is good.
Yeah, there's also one about the relative trust scores, and I have to confess that I don't have the actual up-to-date details about Finland. I can certainly look them out for you, but I do think it's worth making the point that as trust in news has fallen for all kinds of reasons, and we can talk about how, why that is. We are just adamant that this is going to be a tool for us. And one of the things we've done, Leonard, you probably know this, is we've done some very early research just on a group of users who started to look at these signals, and it's very conclusive. It's self-selecting and it's a small sample, but we still think when we get to do more research on this, the early indications are that this is really helpful to people and that they want it. They like to be able to anchor what they're seeing, to put some context around it, to know that if they have doubts about it, and we expect that as C2PA rolls out, more widely and it scales up, there will be kind of a fairly simple way of looking at a piece of content and doing that initial determination about whether there's an issue with it. But then there'll be the ability, as Leonard has discussed, to sort of really drill down and look at lots of other factors about that content. So it works on a number of levels, and we don't expect most users most of the time to be doing an enormous amount of research around each bit of content. But what it does give you is where that content has issues or there is a suspicion around it. both for journalists looking at it coming from other journalists and from people looking at it as audience members. It just gives you the ability to really change the way you look at a piece of content and be able to interrogate so many different aspects of it. So that's one of the things we think is really positive. I'll hand back to you, Leonard, for some more.
Absolutely. Yeah, actually, let me just, I'll throw something that is a very interesting, sort of a little mind bender, if you will, when we talk about that sort of thing, which is, you know, we talked about obviously using AI and identifying the use of AI. And Laura gave some great examples of human reviewers going in and adding to the reviews. But there's nothing that says, and in fact, there are a couple of members of the C2PA who are working on putting AI generated reviews. So we said, now we don't do detection as part of the C2PA, but some of our members do. And so there's going back to types of assertions. If somebody runs a detection algorithm and wants to add that an assertion about the fact that it was run, and here's the probability and how well it ran, and like you can put that information in there, and that's another trust signal that gets used downstream. So these are all, more and more of those signals that go along. And yeah, so let's see what some other questions. So Daniel has an interesting question, and it also goes to a little bit of a question that was asked by Cherry. So about how do you know that the implementation you're using is good or is proper or is following the rules? So the answer to that is that we are in the process of wrapping up right now. So there's two pieces. So I'll back up a bit. So the C2PA is something we call a trust list. So when those signatures that sign the credentials, at the end of the day, get checked against a trust list. Is it a trusted entity? And there's an official C2PA one. The IPTC that Laura mentioned has one for professional publishers. And there are other groups that are building their lists as well. So we have these lists. How do you get on a list? You get on a list because you have demonstrated compliance with the standard. That's how you will get on the C2PA trust list. We're going to have you go through a compliance testing procedure, much like how you get the Wi-Fi logo on a package because you complied with their testing, or the Bluetooth logo. We're going to do something very similar. Or you've verified your identity as a human or organization. The IPTC knows you as a respected publisher, like the BBC or CBC or the like. So that's how we're going to get there, and that's how you as a user are going to know that, and that information then shows up in the fact that you get a nice trusted signal at the end of the day. And sure, so that's part of it. That's how we're going to ensure that our members are doing the right things. And we also want to make sure that there is flexibility. There are reasons why different implementers will take different approaches. And as long as they do it within the bounds of the whole standard, and the things that are mandated, that's fine. There can be differences, but all of those differences get documented accordingly, and users will know what's happening. Transparency is a great thing.
There's a question from Peter, which I just want to pick up on, Len, where you have a look at maybe some of the other questions, because there's a couple of real technical ones in there. And it is that, what's to stop bad actors from using the standard and having false content? And this comes down to the whole certification issue that we've spent quite a lot of time on over the last few months. And the idea is that, there is something which links you to the content that you have produced, and that it goes through a bona fide certification process, so that nobody can pose as you and pretend they're the BBC if they're not. And I think, this is why it's so important to get that right, because we absolutely have to make sure that everybody who gets a certificate and can then post content, which is linking back to that, that bona fide user, does that through a process which is very clear, very transparent, and that we can keep a check on. So it's hugely important, because one of the biggest problems that I think we're starting to see now is far more imposter content than we ever thought was was out there. And I was talking to some lovely colleagues at TikTok who were kind of talking about just that and showing us how much stuff there was out there, which, you know, perhaps none of us, you know, generally in the course of our time on TikTok encounter, but that is posing as various organizations, not just the BBC, but many others. And we know that there will be people who will try to gain this. But Leonard, you can perhaps give it, you know, a bit of reassurance about some of the more technical details about how that's happening.
Yeah, happy to do so. Actually, one thing I'll add before I get there, it's also worth pointing out that, you know, we obviously, this is where Laura comes from, and talking about, you know, news publishers and everything, and that's extremely important. But as I mentioned, it's not the only thing that, the only area where we see folks. One of the most interesting areas that's come out recently, that to me, I hadn't really thought about until they approached us, is what's called the GLAM industry. I had never even heard this term. Galleries, libraries, archives, and museums. So this is a world that knows provenance. They've been dealing with provenance of physical objects for centuries. And now, as their world becomes digital, they now want to need a way to bring those same ideas of provenance to their digital world and their digital spaces. And so we're having these great conversations, not only about the same sort of things that we've been talking about in Laura and the publishing case around, you know, here's a digital asset, it was born digital, let's apply provenance. But there's this really interesting, to me at least, from this tech world. If I have a physical object and I've taken an image of it, or a video, or a 3D scan, how do I link the provenance of the digital entity to the provenance of the physical entity? You know, how does that all work? So great conversations going on, and I think these are the types of things that we're continuing to see come about. So I want folks to think it's not just about news. Believe me, it's not the only group that we think about. And that people, as I said, people approaching us. All right, so let's try a technical question there. All right, John has an excellent question around the X509 certificates. So, John, the thing that prevents expired certificates from breaking the trust is timestamps. So and this is, again, not something we invented. This is how stuff has been working for 30 years. So when you sign with one of those certificates, you pair it up with a trusted timestamp. So you don't just look at the clock of the device. You call another system called a trusted timestamp entity. It returns to you a trusted, it itself is signed, timestamp. And what that ensures is that guarantees you proof of existence. That says, at this moment in time, according to the trusted timestamp service, that not only did the asset exist, but the signature on the asset existed, and it had not been revoked. It was valid. So that combination of pieces is how that works. And again, this is how signed PDF works. It's how the web works. It's, we just use tech stuff that already works really, really well. And so that's the answer to that question. And it's an excellent one. I will say that you can also, so that happens. You can always update the certificate. So I mentioned a standard from the European Union called ETSI-LTA. That stands for long-term and archival. So that's a mechanism whereby you can also, if, for example, you did not have a timestamp originally, you can add one later, you can update revocation information. So again, we're just leveraging these standards that are already out there and applying them in our context.
And I hope you're getting the impression, from this conversation, that this is one of those kind of, I'm not going to say perfect, because, we have our moments, don't we, when we, discuss things, and that's absolutely right. And they get, we have disagreements, but I think that's very healthy in a partnership, which is very, very much from our point of view, an equal one between the media companies and the tech gurus like Leonard, who get this and who know this and have spent years, building distinguished careers around understanding the guts of this, and bringing together those two organizations or types of organization has been really fruitful. And the other thing that I think has been incredibly positive around this is the fact that it is an agnostic standard. So you can get on a trust list. There is sometimes a criticism of disinformation that it's about a particular point of view. This is a technology standard. It's agnostic. You can have it as long as you were on one of those lists. Nobody in the BBC is deciding who is going to be on those lists and saying yes or no to organisations. And we have people from all sides of the kind of the journalistic spectrum, if you like. So I think it's really important to make that point, because you, Leonard, made the point earlier about this being very much about trusting what you're seeing and not truth. Okay, we're not saying that everything that's marked with C2PA is 100% true, because that would be an absolute hiding to nothing. What we are saying is that if you see that on it, you can trust that it has come from the organization that you have chosen to trust. So Alex has come up with a question along those lines around kind of the persistence. Have we covered this of a trusted entity? So once they're on the list, are they subject to regular trust checks? Do we know the answer to that one?
We do, and actually that was one of the ones, Alex's question, and Oliver had a similar question about, and you were just answering it. So how do you get on that list? So that list, so as I mentioned, there are multiple lists, and Oliver, to your question, every user can absolutely positively define their own lists. That's not prevented at all. In fact, we expect that users, again, just like they can do in their browsers today, can add their own trust entities, what are called trust anchors. Totally fine. But that list isn't controlled by Adobe, as Laura said. It's not controlled by the BBC. It is entirely based on an implementation. It's not about a human, and it's not about an organization. It is about a piece of software or hardware that has demonstrated through a testing process that it is following the rules. So we document the rules. We have a third-party testing, like Underwriters Labs, or you're all familiar with places that do this kind of thing. You're an implementer, you send in your implementation, it gets tested by this third party. If it passes, then they are issued a certificate by a standard certificate authority. And basically, we're not really involved in the process at all, except being told, hey, this person passed. Like, great, that's wonderful to know. We'll put them on a list of known trusted implementations. But the C2PA, Adobe, BBC, we're not involved. It's not to make sure exactly what you mentioned, Oliver, that these problems don't happen. And then Alex, to your point, absolutely. That's an ongoing process. You don't just get it once and it's good forever, because that would not make sense for a lot of reasons. So yes, those implementations absolutely go through ongoing re-review. The assumption is when they upgrade, that software and hardware changes. Hey, we all know that. So those have to get checked again. And there's also a revocation process. If something is discovered to have been attacked or compromised, or we discover later that there was a back door we didn't know about, we can revoke it at any time, even retroactively. We don't want to do that, but we have to have all of those mechanisms. Yeah. And again,
absolutely.
I keep repeating myself, this process isn't new. This is the exact same process that browser vendors go through to decide what goes in your browser's trust list. So we're just following industry norm. We really don't want to go out on our own and do something different or crazy, because that's not the way the world works in 2025.
Yeah, 100%. And you've segued beautifully into Cameron's question, which I think also segues beautifully into kind of the last few minutes of this, where we want to talk a little bit about, what next and what can you do? And Cameron's question is about, what kind of obstacles have there been in the adoption of C2PA, and what can we do to kind of encourage people to take it on board? We did a survey recently, so we got some people together in a conference room in Manchester in the UK and asked them exactly that. And they were media organisations, and we said, what's standing in your way? We did a survey, and they said three things really. One was time. This is time consuming. We've got to train people. We've got to work out how to do it. And in the early days of doing this, the process by which you kind of get an organization online with it has been a bit too complicated, and that's starting to get much easier now through the work of various people, including Leonard and the IPTC, who we mentioned. So the the getting of a certificate and the getting on board with this is becoming easier and easier. And that was one of the key things. The second is money. And again, it's getting cheaper, which is great. And the third is just a kind of a sense of this is new. We are essentially changing the entire way the internet works. And people just want a bit of time to think about how that fits into their processes. It has to be frictionless for journalists. As any journalist on this call will know, the last thing you want is something that's going to slow you down when you're trying to publish a story. So getting over those obstacles, I think we're doing a pretty good job of at the moment. And, I guess because of all those things, now coming really to fruition and lots of work going on through things like the IBC, International Broadcasting Convention, where we're going to be doing more work this year, as well as through all the C2PA committees. I guess our call to action would be, Leonard, at this point, that, we would love you to join us on this journey if you haven't already. If you are already, we're absolutely loving having you part of the family. And we really want to see this be something which is very widely adopted and is very widely helpful in helping organisations in the media field, from my point of view, to protect their content and to allow people to link it back to them and to understand it better. What would you add to that, Leonard, in terms of a kind of a call to action for people who need one?
Yeah, I mean, I think those are excellent calls. I think the other one is spread the word. Take this back to your own organizations. Think about how you can leverage it in your world. And as I mentioned, it's not just about news publishers. The world of glam was something completely different. We've had people from finance, from fintech, come and talk to us about how provenance is relevant in the financial world. We joke at the C2PA about how car mechanics are going to use this. We haven't been approached by that group yet, but you never know. So this is really what we want, that's education. So we've educated you, and we would love for you to take that education and now educate your folks and such. If you want to talk about it at the dinner table and maybe somebody next to you will pick up the ideas, that's great too. I'm not sure it's cocktail party talk, but maybe you go to different cocktail parties than I do. But yeah, get the word out, I think, is the other thing I would pass along.
I've just put my email address in the chat. If anybody wants to email me, they're very, very welcome to. I can put people in touch with Leonard if that's okay, or you could put your email address in too. But
doing that the same. Thank you. Happy to do that.
Perfect. I think we've reached the end of the questions. I'm going to just Adriana's come back on screen, and so she's either going to tell us we've done a terrible job and that that we need to kind of like redress it immediately, or perhaps do you have any questions yourself, Adriana, that you want to throw at us?
No, just thank you all for attending, Lauren and Leonard. It was super helpful, I think, and I'm sure they're going to get lots of direct emails and questions. And I think the idea is the understanding how the C2PA works and what can be done to increase trust within the ecosystem. That's what we are all about. So thank you so much for this amazing talk from you guys. And just to remind, we have a webinar coming on the anatomy of a hack on the 27th of March. Gemma put the details on the chat, and also on the evolution of the consumer security on the 24th of April. So Gemma put details that you can sign up with a QR code. So thank you so much for attending. Gemma will also send an email with the CPD certificate to all of you that attended. And there will be a recording available later on if you feel like you should catch on the words again and watch again what this amazing Palestine said. Thank you very much.
Pleasure. See everyone.